When the Johnson family decided to move to the country, it was supposed to be a fresh start. Emily and Mark Johnson, along with their 2 children, Sophie and Ben, were leaving behind the noise and chaos of the city for the tranquility of rural life. They found an old farmhouse miles away from the nearest town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. It was the perfect escape, or so they thought. From the moment they arrived, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, almost oppressive. The farmhouse stood old and weathered, its wooden structure groaning with age. The fields surrounding it were overgrown, the crops long dead. An eerie silence enveloped the land, broken only by the distant cawing of crows. The first few days were uneventful, spent unpacking and settling into their new home. Emily, always the optimist, busied herself with cleaning and redecorating, while Mark tackled the numerous repairs needed around the house. Sophie and Ben explored the vast property, finding joy in the simplest of things, catching frogs by the pond, climbing the ancient oak tree in the front yard. But then, the disturbances began. It started small, a door creaking open on its own, cold drafts slipping through tightly shut windows, the sensation of being watched. Sophie was the first to notice. One evening, while drawing in her room, she saw a shadow move across her wall. She looked around, but there was no one there. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. A few nights later, Ben woke up screaming. He claimed to have seen a woman standing at the foot of his bed, her face obscured by a veil of darkness. Mark and Emily dismissed it as a nightmare, but the fear in Ben's eyes was unmistakable. As the days turned into weeks, the occurrences grew more frequent and intense. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in strange places. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls at night. Whispers, barely audible, seemed to come from the walls themselves. The once peaceful farmhouse now felt like a prison, its inhabitants tormented by unseen forces. Emily tried to keep a brave face, but the strain was evident. One evening, while working in the garden, she unearthed an old rusted box. Intrigued, she brought it inside and opened it. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and a diary, all belonging to a woman named Abigail. The letters spoke of love and loss, of betrayal and heartbreak. As Emily read through the diary, a chilling story unfolded. Abigail had lived on this farm over a century ago. She had fallen in love with a farmhand, but their affair was discovered by her husband. In a fit of rage, he killed them both and buried their bodies somewhere on the property. Abigail's spirit, wronged and restless, had never left. Emily showed the diary to Mark. They were both skeptical but couldn't deny the strange happenings in their home. That night, as they lay in bed, the temperature dropped suddenly, the room filled with an oppressive presence. Emily felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and a voice whispered in her ear, "Find me." Desperation set in. Mark and Emily decided to search for Abigail's grave, hoping to put her spirit to rest. They spent days digging in the fields, following the clues in the diary. Finally, in a secluded corner of the property, they found it, a shallow grave marked by a weathered stone. As they unearthed the remains, a piercing scream echoed through the air. The ground trembled, and the sky darkened. Abigail's spirit, a ghostly figure of rage and sorrow, rose from the grave. Her eyes, hollow and filled with pain, locked onto the family. "You should not have come here," she hissed. The ghost advanced, her anger palpable. Emily and Mark stood frozen, clutching each other in fear. Sophie and Ben, watching from a distance, screamed for their parents. In that moment, Emily realized what needed to be done. She stepped forward, holding the diary out to Abigail. "We're sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "We know what happened to you. We want to help." Abigail's expression softened, her ghostly form flickering. She reached out, touching the diary. In an instant, the oppressive presence lifted. The sky cleared and the temperature returned to normal. Abigail's spirit, at peace, faded away, leaving behind a sense of calm. The Johnsons buried the diary with Abigail's remains, hoping it would bring her eternal rest. The disturbances ceased, and life on the farm slowly returned to normal. But the memory of those harrowing weeks stayed with them, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Years later, as Sophie and Ben grew up and moved away, Emily and Mark decided to sell the farm. As they packed their belongings, Emily found one last thing, a photograph of Abigail, smiling softly, her eyes no longer filled with sorrow. It was a sign, she thought, that Abigail had finally found peace. Yet, on their final night at the farmhouse, as they lay in bed, a soft whisper filled the room. "Thank you," it said. Emily and Mark held each other close, knowing that while they had freed one spirit, the shadows of the past would forever linger.